Ever get that feeling you see some new tech, some groundbreaking invention, and you just know it's going to be huge, but
Yeah.
then it just fizzles.
Happens all the time, right?
Drives me crazy. So, what gives? Why do some products become the next iPhone and others just vanish? Luckily, we have a guidebook for this journey, and it's a classic.
Crossing the Chasm, right. It's
Oh,
practically legendary in the tech world.
exactly. We're diving deep into Geoffrey Moore's insights today. And you know, it's fascinating. He keeps updating this book. Like it's on its own product roadmap or something.
He does, which tells you something right there. This chasm thing, it's not going away.
Not even with all the rapid fire changes in tech. So for anyone who hasn't had a chance to read it yet, what exactly is the chasm?
Imagine this gap. On one side, you have those early tech adopters, the folks who camp out for the newest gadget no matter what. They're driven by that novelty.
Right. The risk takers, the cutting edge folks.
Exactly. But then, on the other side of this chasm, you have the rest of us, the practical people, the ones who need to see how it works, who need proof before we buy in. That's the chasm, the gap between those early adopters and the mainstream market.
And companies fall into that gap when they try to market to everyone the same way, right?
Yeah.
Like just because a product is cool for the techies doesn't mean it's a slam dunk for everyone else.
You got it. We need convincing. Moore calls us pragmatists, which I think is pretty fitting. Show us how it works, show us it's reliable, show us other people using it successfully, then we'll talk.
So how do you bridge that chasm? Does
Yeah.
Moore give us a step-by-step guide or something?
He does, and he uses the surprising analogy, D-Day.
D-Day, like the invasion of Normandy. What does that have to do with launching a product?
It's about focus. Just like a military invasion needs a specific target, a beachhead, companies need that same precision when they're launching a product. You can't just storm every beach at once.
So you're saying blindly launching a product is like a recipe for disaster.
Pretty much. Moore says, forget trying to appeal to everyone at once, even if you think your product is the next iPhone. Find your niche. Find a group with a specific burning problem that your product solves better than anything else out there.
So you're saying find the people who are practically desperate for what you're offering. They become your, what, your early champions.
Your success stories, their enthusiasm, it's contagious. It's proof to those pragmatists, the ones we were talking about earlier, that this whole thing isn't some big risk.
Okay, I'm starting to see the strategy here. You target that niche, you become their go-to solution, and then
Then you need what Moore calls the whole product.
whole product meaning.
It's rarely enough to just have a cool gadget, a cool piece of software. You need the whole ecosystem around it. Think about it. A 3D printer is neat, but it's pretty much useless without the software, the materials, the support to actually make something with it.
Right, it's like having a smartphone is great, but
Mhm.
not if you don't have the apps, the data plan,
Yeah,
maybe a good protective case.
Yeah.
It's a whole experience.
precisely. Moore calls this whole product thinking. You're not just selling a product, you're selling a complete solution to a problem.
Okay, that makes sense. But let's say you're a startup, right? And you're still building out that ecosystem. What's the play then?
Partnerships. They are essential. You team up with other companies that offer complementary products, complementary services. You become stronger together, offering a more well-rounded solution.
Like assembling a dream team, right? You might have the star player, but you need that supporting cast to really win.
Yeah.
What else does Moore say about building that winning strategy?
This one's interesting, a little counterintuitive. You need to create the competition.
Wait, create competition. Isn't that the opposite of what you want to do?
It seems that way, right? But remember those pragmatists, the ones who need that extra push? They don't want to be the first ones through the door. They want to see options. They want to see comparisons. They want to see who the emerging leader is.
So you're saying even if you're disrupting the market, you have to position yourself within that existing market.
Exactly. Give them, those pragmatists, a frame of reference. Show them where you fit in, who you're aiming to replace, who else is in the game, even if you're the one changing the rules of the game.
It's about carefully creating that narrative, that feeling of this is the future and these are the major players.
By the way,
Pragmatists feel confident they're backing the right horse.
exactly. Okay, so you've got your beachhead, you've got your whole product, you've even cleverly created some competition. What's next?
Well, now you got to get that product into the hands of your target customer,
Right.
right? So we're talking logistics, distribution channels.
Now you're getting it. That's where things get really interesting, but let's save that juicy topic for part 2 of our deep dive.
Okay, so we've strategized about the beachhead, the whole product, but then, yeah, logistics. You got to actually get the product into people's hands.
Distribution, right. And this is where things get a little less theoretical, wouldn't you say? Because it's not just about logistics, it's about picking the right path to your customer.
Is there like a distribution playbook? Or does it like totally depend on the product and the market?
It depends, for sure. Moore, he breaks it down into a few major channels. Each one has its own strengths, its own vibe. You've got your classic direct sales force. Think big contracts, enterprise level stuff, lots of, hand-holding.
Right. Those are for the clients who need that personal touch. The
Yeah.
big players.
Exactly. High touch, high stakes. Then you've got this two-tiered approach, going through resellers, partners, particularly effective in that mid-market space.
Almost like franchising your way into new markets, right? You're tapping into existing networks.
Exactly. Leveraging those relationships. And of course, can't forget the whole online world, right? Web-based self-service is huge, especially with software, anything cloud-based.
Well, sure. Makes sense. Pragmatists, they love efficiency. Being able to research, compare, buy, all online. It's a no-brainer.
Absolutely. But then there's this interesting blend that's emerged. Moore calls it Sales 2.0. Think online demos, webinars, free trials. It's combining the digital with that human touch.
Meeting in the middle, basically. You can still do your homework online,
Right.
but then you get those questions answered directly.
Right. The takeaway here, it's pretty simple. Your distribution model. It has to fit your customer like a glove. How do they like to buy things? What do they value?
Okay. Distribution, check. What else does Moore highlight as being like mission critical for crossing the chasm?
Pricing. And once again, he throws a curveball. See, during this chasm crossing phase, he says, focus on motivating the channel, not just, maximizing your profit right off the bat.
Interesting. So like keeping your resellers, your partners happy
Yeah.
is more important than squeezing every penny out of each sale.
It's about the long game. You're still building your empire, right?
Right.
So those partners, they need to be your champions. They need to be out there pushing your product with genuine enthusiasm. And a big part of that is making sure they're making a decent margin.
Right. Win-win. They benefit, you get wider reach, everybody's happy. But how do you balance that with making sure the price still makes sense for the end customer?
That's the tightrope. Moore calls it pricing to sell. It's got to feel like a no-brainer for that pragmatist who's already leaning in.
Gotcha. So the price reflects quality, but it's not a barrier to entry either.
Right. Now, we've tackled the logistics, distribution, pricing, but Moore hints at something bigger here, doesn't he? This whole chasm thing, it's more than just marketing tactics. It's about your whole company, your whole approach.
You talked about a molting process, right? Like a total transformation.
Exactly. See, you're shifting from a company of pioneers, right? The early adopters, the risk takers that get you to the chasm. But to cross it, you need settlers.
Okay, I like this analogy. So pioneers versus settlers in the business sense. What's the difference?
Think of it like this. Pioneers, they're explorers, driven by innovation. They push boundaries. But to cross the chasm, to build something lasting, you need settlers. They come in, they build the systems, the processes. They're focused on stability, long-term growth.
Like it's the difference between, I don't know, discovering a new land and actually building a city on it, right?
Yeah, perfect analogy. And this shift, it's not always easy. It might mean changes in leadership. It might mean changing how your teams are structured. It might even change who you hire.
So it's not just your product that has to adapt to cross the chasm. It's your whole company culture.
Yeah.
You're leveling up to meet the demands of that mainstream market.
Exactly. And a key part of that, of course, is product development. Remember that whole product thinking.
Right, right.
It's not just about churning out features. It's about the customer experience from start to finish.
Installation, support, how well it integrates with, whatever systems they've already got.
It's holistic. Moore calls it whole product R&D. It's driven by the market, not just, some engineer going, oh, this would be cool to build.
So there's much more collaboration between the engineers, the marketing team, the sales folks. Everyone's on the same page.
Exactly. Because they're all focused on delivering that complete solution to the customer's problem.
All right, so let's get into it. Show me the money. What does successfully crossing the chasm look like in the real world?
Well, one company Moore really digs into is Documentum. Ever heard of them?
Rings a bell. Vaguely.
Yeah. Back in the 90s, they were pioneers in this kind of niche category, enterprise content management, they called it.
Content management. Okay, yeah, not exactly like a household name. What'd they do?
Think about it. Back then, big companies, especially in Pharmaceuticals. Drowning in paperwork, clinical trials, regulatory filings. It was all on paper.
Chaos.
Total chaos. And Documentum comes in. They digitize everything, make it searchable, manageable. But here's the key. They didn't just stop at, here's a digital filing cabinet. They really understood the specific needs of these pharma companies.
So they tailored their solution.
Whoa, absolutely. They addressed the regulatory hurdles, the security concerns. It wasn't just a product, it was peace of mind. You know what I mean?
So they basically owned that niche,
Right, yeah.
built their reputation, and from there.
From there, they had the credibility to branch out. It's a textbook chasm crossing move. And speaking of textbook, we got to talk about Salesforce, right?
Oh, for sure. Talk about a company that defines the whole cloud software game.
Right. But back in the day, putting your customer data, all your critical business stuff on the cloud, that was a tough sell.
It's funny to think about now, because now it's like everybody's on the cloud.
Yeah.
But back then, risky.
Big time. So how did Salesforce get people to make that leap of faith? Well, they understood that not everyone was ready. They picked their beachhead mid-market companies.
Interesting. So not the biggest fish, not the smallest, but that sweet spot.
Exactly. These were companies that needed that, like enterprise-grade CRM software, but the existing solutions, either way too expensive or just way too complicated for their tech setup.
So they needed something powerful, but user-friendly.
Bingo. And that's where Salesforce came in. Cloud-based. So no more clunky hardware, no massive IT overhaul, plus their pricing. They had these flexible subscription plans that worked for those mid-market budgets.
Made it a no-brainer.
Total no-brainer. And they rode that wave to, well, the top. So another example, VMware. Now they're all about virtualization.
Virtualization. See, now we're getting into the weeds. That's next-level tech jargon.
It is, but it's a perfect example of taking a complex concept and finding that specific pain point. You got to meet people where they're at, right? VMware, they started with system administrator.
Okay, the folks behind the scenes keeping the internet running.
Right. And these guys, they were struggling to manage all these servers. Each application needed its own dedicated server. It was a mess, inefficient, expensive.
Total headache.
The worst. And VMware says, hey, what if instead of all those physical servers, we virtualize them, run multiple things on a single machine?
More bang for your buck, basically.
Way less hassle. So those system administrators, they were like, sign me up.
And from there, they had that proof point to really scale up.
Exactly. Solve a real problem for a specific group. That's how you build momentum.
These examples are great. But if there's one big takeaway from Crossing the Chasm for anyone listening who's got that big idea, that next big thing, what would it be?
It's not enough to just have a great product. It's got to be the right product for the right market at the right time. You really got to know your customer.
Do your homework.
Big time. And don't be afraid to adapt. Your product might need to change. Your company culture might need to change. It's all about meeting the needs of that mainstream market.
It's like that old saying, adapt or die, right?
Yeah.
You got to be willing to evolve. Well, on that note, massive thanks to our expert for navigating us through this deep dive.
My pleasure. This book is a classic for a reason. So much to unpack.
Absolutely. And to our listeners, thanks for coming along for the ride. We'll catch you on our next deep dive. Until then, keep innovating.